Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final session. So, breaking away for a minute to look at the book of Job. And I think the reason why would be because this is perhaps the most ancient book in the entire canon of Scripture. If that's the case, then it does, in many ways, attach itself to the context of the events that are taking place around the mid portions of Genesis, perhaps commensurate with the time of Abraham. But I digress. So, Job, a tale of a priest, and I hope that you've seen at this point, this has been a very common theme in many of our lessons. And we get to spend more time focusing on this rather than other themes as I did with the previous iterations of these intensives. A tale of a priest who is purified through fire and sword. So, a little bit to discuss here, but I'll try to be as concise as possible to be able to unpack it further in the future. So, let's go to the far left side of the screen. So notice what's pointed out about Job in the opening chapter. There's a man named Job, and he is a man of complete integrity, but the Hebrew word here is literally blameless. Now, this word is also said of men like Noah, Abraham, and Jacob. We look at these particular passages here where it's said of Noah in Genesis 6:9, he's a righteous man. That's tamim, a variation of the word tam, which means essentially the exact same thing, blameless. It is said of Abraham when he is called into God's presence to live or walk in his presence and be blameless. Again, same word. And that Jacob, this is odd because it's a very different word in the CSB, was said to be a quiet man. In some cases, this word can mean complete, but it is also rendered blameless in several other places. And so its interchangeability is always something that needs to be thoroughly researched, but yet in the context that preceded it in the previous two, it makes perfect sense. What exactly is meant here as Jacob being a quiet man? We've also always surmised as Jacob is a man who enjoyed the finer things, i.e., staying in the tents and not being out in the fields, hunting and gathering like his older brother did. But this word connecting here to previous stories may seem to suggest something a little different here. So this is also applied to sacred animals in a sacrificial way because repeatedly throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, this word is translated either unblemished or without defect or something to that extent, where again, the animal is complete, it's whole, it's not got anything that would make it offensive unto Yahweh and would be acceptable on the behalf of the one offering it, which is really what we're driving at here, the next blue block. So Job is postured as a priest representing his family and eventually his friends. So in the opening chapter, it's his family. He's offering on the part of his sons and daughters who, after their drinking and carousing, that he's concerned if they have blasphemed Yahweh, God will judge them. So he offers in an intercessory way to cover for their sins. And at the end of the book, the three friends that were wrong in their assessment of Yahweh and his justice and who have wrongly accused Job, God says he does not accept their words. They are to go to Job and they will present to Job their offerings, and Job will pray for them, and God will listen to him and accept his prayer on their behalf. So Job, from start to finish in this 42 chapter book, is seen as a priestly figure for sure. And he is seen to be acceptable before Yahweh by virtue of the use of this word, right? And so again, this connects us over here to this use in Leviticus 22, where the animals are to be unblemished for the sake of it being acceptable to Yahweh. So now think about that. Job is a priest, but at the same time, in the rest of the book that connects chapters 1 to 42, which is a lot of narrative space, here Job is seemingly the one being postured no longer as priest at the beginning and priest at the end, but in the middle as the tortured sacrifice. Because think about it, you have a whole unblemished animal that's just fine and happy existing until eventually somebody wants to offer it, and then a neck or a dagger is plunged into its neck, and blood is spilt everywhere, and its entrails are carved out, and its body dismembered to be offered up on an altar meant for that very purpose, right? No longer to live, but through the torturous means of it, through the application of sword, then comes fire to completely combust and change it to make it acceptable further still to Yahweh and the offerer through the animal, right? So through the loss of his possessions and family, along with enduring the accusations of his friends. So sword comes to his family and the touch of fire by the tongues of his friends. You think of the words of James and the fact that this thing, this unbridled piece of flesh that exists behind our teeth and lips, is set on fire by hell itself, right? So the fire of loss and persecution make him presentable in the presence of Yahweh, right? Because he's falsely accused. And it purifies him in the process because as he's working through the machinations of it all, he feels that yet while what has happened to him has been unjust, yet God is not unjust. And he will not accuse God of being unjust, and he certainly will not curse God and die. He knows that he wants to argue his case before God and ask God why, but he will not lay the blame at God for what is happening here in an unjust way, as if to say that God is a tyrant. So I've already winked at these verses here about Job interceding for his friends. And then, of course, I think it's important for us to appreciate there's an apocalyptic overtone to Job here, too. Now, apocalyptic should not mean fire and brimstone. That's often what gets connotated every time we use that word, and it's wrong. Thank you, Hollywood, for perverting our mind on that. Apocalyptic in the literary sense, especially biblical literature, is the unveiling. Think of it just simply as sitting in the seats right in front of a great stage with a massive red curtain that's being pulled back, and all the actors behind the stage are now being unveiled for you. That's an apocalypse in the biblical sense, right? So in the beginning of the story, we have an opening of heaven to see the divine council assembling in secret, because Job's not privy to this, but we, the readers, get to be. And of course, even Satan is there in this conversation that happens with Yahweh. And by the end, while Job is not part of that divine council's assembly, Job has God unveil himself to Job, though somewhat veiled in the fact that he's speaking from a whirlwind, but yet it's God's voice. And Job is interacting face to face with Yahweh, not through an intermediate, right? As the priest, he's the one that gets to stand before Yahweh. So this is where we see the backup for that in these particular chapters. And also, we should appreciate the fact that Job desires to see Yahweh. He pleads his case, and when he gets to, he learns from his ignorance. So God has found Job acceptable all the way up to a certain point, but now Job has made some statements that God does have to address. And chapters 38 through 41 are essentially that dialogue in which Job is being dressed down by God for the fact that he does not see things as God sees because he cannot. And so once he understands God's perspective a little better, he says this in response to God: surely I spoke about things I did not understand. So that brings us to the so what. Job's like an Adam. He serves as a priest, and he learns wisdom by walking with Yahweh. That's exactly what was supposed to be happening in the garden. The first Adam failed at that, but this Job, through sword and fire, seems to realize that, because he finishes this statement by saying, my eyes have seen you. And because of that, because of my interface with you, I reject my words, everything I said in my assessment of you, and I'm sorry for them. So that should make us stop and pause and give some thought to what we understand as goes our priesthood and our sanctification as we continue to draw closer in relationship to Yahweh as his priest that represent him to all creation. So this has been a true joy for me. It always is. I hope that you're getting something from it. I would love to hear your feedback if you would find a way to communicate with me on that. So my cell phone is 254-630-5954. Email address jason.thomas1860@yahoo.com, or just find me at church. I'd love to hear from you on this. But thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again in our next intensive.